Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak slowly as Zoom lets everyone in groups, and we're seeing the attendee count climb. Happy to see everyone here at the end of our 11th annual International Women's Day. The first of these we've done virtual, but happy to do it and happy to have you here and joining us today. My name is Lawrence. I'll be running the administrative and questions aspect of this Women and Money breakout program with our moderator. In just a moment, I'm going to shut up so she can start. But you'll be able to submit questions in two different fashions. One, if you hit the raise hand function, we'll see you pop up when someone just did it, thank you. When you do the raise hand function, when we get to the question and answer period, our moderator will call on you. I'll be able to unmute you. You can ask your question. Or if you are unable to or don't want to come on the microphone, you can send us a question to the question and answer box, and I'll be shuffling through them and getting them there as well. So with that in mind, just want to, again, thank everyone for being here, and our moderator, let's get it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Welcome everyone to our session today, which focuses on how we can improve financial health for women and make our recovery from the pandemic more inclusive. Joining me today are three thought leaders. I'll introduce them briefly. Their full and very impressive bios are included in the materials that we received in preparation for today. And first, we have Judy Dougherty, who is the head of enterprise capabilities for Prudential Financial. We have Nate Brown, who is the senior vice president at PIMCO and serves as the director for the PIMCO Foundation. And we have Fiona Greig, who is the director of research for JPMorgan Chase Institute. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this discussion on economic inclusivity. So let's get started. Now, the first question we have is a general question for our panel. We know that wealth inequality is a story of gender inequality. And when we think about the imbalance of wealth between men and women, that has really been as a result of women doing a lot more of the unpaid care and domestic work. Now, COVID-19 has really revealed the seriousness of financial fragility and brought that to the forefront. Now, so this is my question to the panelists, what is the state of economic equality for women, and how are your organizations helping to move that needle? And Judy, let's start with you.
Thank you, Vanessa. And first, let me just say how much I appreciate being part of this wonderful panel on this really important topic. You know, I think when we talk about economic equality for women, it helps to take a step back. Over the last 40 or 50 years, the percentage of women in professional and managerial roles has tripled. It's now about 52% of those roles are held by women. What's more, 96% of women now say they're either the primary or share decision-making responsibilities in the household when it comes to finances. Yet for all the financial empowerment women have achieved over the last half century, we still lack equal opportunities for achieving long-term financial security. You know, as a society, we can think about spectacular advances that we've made over the last decades on many fronts: technology, medicine, you know, the things we can do when we really put our mind to it. But I would argue that we've not really prioritized meaningful advances in economic equality for women and people of color. And the facts as it relates to women really speak for themselves. We know that a gender pay gap persists, with women earning now roughly 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns. This not only impacts financial health during their working years, but lower wages then have knock-on effects. It means lower Social Security benefits, lower retirement plan contributions, lower matches on those contributions. Women's 401k balances are about 70% those of men, and that's whether you look at the average or the median. So in short, a wage gap translates to an income gap in retirement as well. And that can be exacerbated by time that women spend out of the workforce throughout their careers because they're caregiving, maybe even job loss. We see the job loss impact during the pandemic. Since February, I think about 55% of total jobs lost have been jobs held by women. In the month of December, all jobs lost were attributed to women's jobs. So we have this compounding effect. We know women tend to live longer. They also tend to retire a little earlier. So now they're taking smaller nest eggs and have to stretch them over longer retirements. So you asked Vanessa what companies are doing to move the needle. So let me mention a couple of things before I hand off to my other panelists. At Prudential, we really try to offer many, many paths to financial advice, face-to-face when conditions allow it, on the phone, online, through the workplace, advice for the many as opposed to advice for the few. We ground that advice in research and a real understanding of women's financial needs and circumstances. We offer a wide range of educational programs, tools, solutions, including a suite of financial wellness resources that we offer to employers to in turn offer at their places of work. These are seminars, help with budgeting, debt management, credit counseling, student loan assistance, help with caregiving. We do this oftentimes in partnership with other companies, even other nonprofits, all aimed to address the barriers to long-term financial health. Another thing that we do, I know all of our firms do, is advocate for meaningful policy change, creating more opportunities for workers to save for retirement, advocating for more universal protection against income interruption because of caregiving events. And I guess the last thing I would highlight, Vanessa, in terms of things we're doing to move the needle, I'd point to Prudential's commitments to racial equity, those commitments that we made for our employees, for our customers, and for our communities, because so many of the financial challenges women are facing are even more acute for women of color.
Judy, thank you very much for those thoughts, very critical for us to consider. Nate, let's go to you.
Yeah, and I want to echo Judy's appreciation of being on this esteemed panel. And I also want to thank you, Judy, for sharing those statistics. I'll just add that the UN issued a report about entitled Gender Equality in the Wake of COVID-19, stating that 740 million women around the world working in formal sectors saw their income drop by an astounding 60%. But we know that healthy companies, healthy societies, and healthy markets go hand in hand. And as a firm, we're committed to, while we're committed to all 17 of the UN SDG goals, we prioritize gender equality as one of our two global priorities. So we address this where we have influence, where we think we'd have the most impact. So that's really striving for internally within our own firm, striving for diversity, and within the investment management industry, as well as through philanthropic efforts. So I really believe it starts with leadership. Manny Roman, who's our CEO, is a signatory of the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which is focused on empowering women in the workplace, marketplace, and community. Additionally, a few years ago, PIMCO commissioned a large-scale market survey on women's views of investing, including their goals, performance expectations, and investment philosophy. The data and conclusions from this research helped us design a program to advocate for gender equality in our industry and communities where we live and work, and educate our clients on how to best partner with women as investors. This program or platform is called Women and Investing, and it has three parts: women in investing, women as investors, and investing in women. So as it relates to women in investing, this is really about the human capital and investing in the talent pipeline to in our firm and the industry to bring more women into portfolio management. Our seminal partner, key partner here is Girls Who Invest, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. As it relates to women as investors, this is recognizing the growing influence of women investors. And we're committed to a research-oriented approach to understand and meet their evolving investment needs. As women take more control over their personal wealth, they're also raising expectations around what investment performance means. And we see emerging trend of women redefining investment performance. Finally, with regard to investing in women, this really is where where our PIMCO Foundation sits and represents our philanthropic efforts. And this is really matching the resources, time, and talents of our employees with leading organizations around the world to support gender equality and tackle the essential challenges facing girls and women today. So let me just speak quickly about that, about this pillar. So we've invested in gender equality for several years now. And over the last 3 years, we've been engaged in a partnership with the Know Me Network. And NOMI is committed to ending human trafficking by creating pathways to safe employment, empowering women and girls to break the cycles of slavery in their families and communities. The effects of COVID-19 has exacerbated human trafficking due to increased poverty, unemployment rates, school dropout rates, heightened abuse. The list goes on, but organizations like NOMI are right in the thick of it. And for example, they're in the red light districts, like in India, working with women and girls through their training program and workforce development program. And it's interesting is that they found that in the sort of height of COVID-19 last year, that their women who had gone through their program actually had 3 months worth of savings, of reserves. Now, just by way of context, they live in communities where people live day to day. You know, you earn what you eat that day. And so that's a big impact. And those women were able to support their communities by making masks and other items, as well as delivering, education on hygiene, which we know was critical in mitigating the negative impacts of COVID-19. So you ask what moving the needle is, really for us, that's it. And we know continuing to invest in women will have a ripple effect, not just for those women and the people for whom they're responsible, but also the broader communities.
Yeah, excellent work, Nate. Thank you. Fiona, your thoughts?
Well, thanks, Vanessa, and thank you for having me.
I mean, there are a couple of maybe anecdotes and facts I would add to the table. The JPMorgan Chase Institute, we've been analyzing the financial lives of people using our administrative data. And of course, we can do that to some extent by gender. And even before COVID, we saw that, even just in terms of liquid assets, checking account balances, our female account holders had, 20 to 30% less. And that matters because we also observe that people experience a lot of volatility in their lives, right? Income volatility, spending volatility, some of which is expected. When you buy a fridge, that's a big expense, but some of it's unexpected. And so we estimate that, families really need 6 weeks worth of cash on hand to manage just the normal vicissitudes of life. And that the vast majority of families don't have that, women in particular. And that, that's important because actually that cash buffer is precisely what people fall back on first, right? It's their first line of defense when they lose a job or when they experience some kind of economic disruption, which has been so widespread during COVID. And so, of course, when we look to the tape on the economic indicators in terms of job loss, Judy cited a lot of the important statistics in terms of, just how much more job loss women and men have experienced, not just at the peak, but it's taken longer for women and women of color in particular to gain those jobs back. But there's also been, people exiting the labor force. And it's interesting when you look at the data, there's really a double dip, right? Many people left the labor force right when COVID hit in April, but then there was a second dip, another departure moment right in September 2020 for women, right? Right when schools opened back up and our kids were home, that's when another big tranche of women fell out of the labor force, more so for women than for men. And so that just kind of underscores just how central a role family supports are playing in terms of people's economic lives, their labor force participation, and of course their finances. And as we think about the kind of government supports that have been put out and are under discussion right now, whether, I think we're talking about a policy landscape that's contemplating paid family leave, that's contemplating, child tax credits and the like, where employers to date have been really on the hook for things like paid family leave in the US. But I think COVID is really kind of peeling back and just showing how vulnerable our workforce is to that kind of fragmented social, safety net. The other thing I think it highlights is just the need for policies and programs and products and services too that support people's financial health and their liquidity positions. And, you know, Chase has been very much on this road, right? Trying to roll out things like auto save in its basic checking account, or engage women of color in particular through Chase chats at banking branches, rolling out things like You Invest that try and democratize the opportunity to, you know, invest. And that was actually another story that we followed closely through COVID. We looked at the extent to which, you know, right in the trough in March, April in the stock market, when the stock market tanked, we actually did see a lot of people jumping into the stock market, notably high income men, not so much women, right? So it just goes to show, like, who is positioned to take advantage of the upswings, who is vulnerable to the downswings. And, you know, so as we think about solutions, you know, JPMorgan Chase has obviously recently announced this big $30 billion commitment to racial wealth gap, closing that racial wealth gap through a number of measures. So obviously we're connecting the dots as our other panelists are in terms of gender and race, because of course, when it comes to things like, you know, family supports, those are the communities for whom those supports are weakest, right? And even within that, you know, the firm is really focused on some very big bets in terms of how to support women of color and an inclusive economy and recovery during and post-COVID. So those are just a few things that I would highlight.
Yeah, well, Fiona, thank you very much. Everything you all have said are definitely moving us forward in helping to make the recovery from this pandemic certainly more inclusive. So thank you for sharing those excellent points. Fiona, I'll stay with you for our next question. Wealth inequality is also a story about racial inequality. And we know that the JPMorgan Chase Institute has done a lot of research on that topic. What are some of those racial gaps in financial outcomes that we need to know about?
Yeah, well, it's helpful to think about it in terms of sort of an income statement and a balance sheet, right? Income statement perspective, you know, there's a basically 70 cents on the dollar gap in terms of income, right? So for every dollar earned by white families, we observe Black families and Latinx families earning roughly 70, 74 cents, something in that range. When we move from income to assets, and we're just looking at kind of liquid assets, right? Not the whole balance sheet, but really just cash. We see that our Black families have 32 cents on the dollar for every dollar held by white families. For Hispanic families, Latinx families, it's more like 47 cents. So much bigger gaps in liquid assets than in income. Now, you might think the two are connected, right? So if you control for income, you take two families, same income level, you don't close that gap in liquid assets. Actually, it's still 50 cents on the dollar. So for two families, same income level, Black family will have roughly 50 cents for every dollar held by white families. So income alone doesn't explain this. And you know, what is important about this is that when you move even from, you know, just that narrow version of wealth, like liquid assets, to the full balance sheet. Now I turn to the tape on, you know, the Survey of Consumer Finance and other surveys where it's more like 10 cents on the dollar, right? 13 cents on the dollar. So these gaps are just dramatic. And by the way, they're not moving. And, you know, some of the striking, you know, sources of those gaps in my mind, I'll just give you two examples. One is the homeownership gap, right? So it's basically a 35-40 percentage point spread in terms of what share of white families own a home versus Black families. And that hasn't changed since that measure has been measured, right? It hasn't changed since the 1960s. The other example I would offer in this country that's really important is student loan debt. And this is the fastest growing debt category in our country. And it's been growing the fastest for Black families. And not only that, it's what's worrisome about it is that we're not just originating more and more loans, but the rate of repayment is much slower for families experiencing circumstances of poverty, in particular Black families. And it's not just because of their own incomes, it's because they can marshal less help from their families. And so that's the sense in which something like student loan debt, housing, are mechanisms by which these racial wealth gaps transmit from one generation to the next and are very hard to kind of like stop that transmission cycle. So it's a big problem. And, the firm is trying to think about this at a couple of different entry points, whether it's creating more affordable rental housing in communities, whether it's trying to provide more down payment assistance for families so that they can buy homes, whether it's actually making sure that Black family homeowners refi right when the rates are low, to the same extent that white homeowners do. This is kind of an insidious way in which, again, certain families are able to kind of take advantage of good economic news and others don't. So those are just a couple thoughts.
Yeah. Fiona, wow, powerful. It's so important for us to understand these gaps so we know that we can get the right solutions to solve those problems. So again, thank you all for sharing your perspectives and what your different organizations are doing, to help solve these problems. Judy, let me go to you for our next question. We know that women have different challenges and considerations financially, especially as they age, compared to men. As an example, I think about a survey that we did at Edward Jones, where we were looking at investor financial confidence and resilience, and we found that men tend to feel more confident and comfortable in their financial standing compared to women. And of course, that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. How can women prepare for their financial futures, and how can they feel confident and more certain about that future?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. If I may, I'd actually like to flip the question and talk about what more do we as a society need to do to better help women prepare and feel more confident about their financial futures. Bootstrapping our way to long-term financial security, is certainly part of the answer, but it can't be the only answer when there are so many challenges and barriers that are causing financial inequity in our country. And when it comes to women specifically, one of the major challenges that we see unfolding in real time during the pandemic is the financial impact of caregivers, of caregiving, particularly for women, particularly for working women. About 65 million Americans identify themselves as a caregiver, and a good chunk of those also work. They hold another job. So these working caregivers, if you will, in addition to their day jobs, are spending almost 27 hours a week providing care, almost 9 hours more than before the pandemic. And I don't think we'll find this surprising. It's estimated that the majority of caregivers are female, maybe as many as 2/3. I personally think that may be underestimated. I think many of ourselves might not even think to categorize ourselves as caregivers. We're just doing what we do. We're taking care of our families. We're caring for those we love, which is a wonderful and fulfilling role in many ways, but also a stressful role in many ways, including financially. Research tells us there's a very direct connection, between caregiving and financial stress. Many working caregivers have to miss work, have to take unpaid leave. People who leave the workforce entirely, say to care for a parent, may forego on average $300,000 in wages and benefits over the course of their lifetime. A little more actually for women, a little less for men. Caregivers spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars out of pocket every month on expenses related to their caregiving. Employers, US businesses, lose tens of billions of dollars a year on lost productivity from full-time workers who also happen to be caregivers because it's impacting them at work. But we also know that these caregivers often don't have a choice. 32 million people in our country do not have access to a single paid sick day. 4 out of 5, Fiona mentioned this as well, don't have access to paid family leave. I'm sure we've all seen a recent report that 1 in 4 women are considering either downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce because of childcare or other care-related challenges during the pandemic. So we have to ask ourselves this, right? Harkening back to our discussion earlier in the panel, more women becoming primary breadwinners, more women serving as household financial decision makers. And yet 1 in 4 in a recent survey considering downshifting or leaving their job. And Fiona, I'm thinking this is on top of the waves who have already left, potentially. I mean, think of the impact of that, not only on these women and on their families, but our economy as a whole. So how can we help women better manage these responsibilities, be better prepared, be more confident about their financial futures? I know we've each talked about things that our companies are doing to move the needle. I thought I would just double click on 2 of them. And one is providing help at the workplace. When we speak with our employer clients, so these are companies we serve through our retirement business or through our group benefits business, the one thing that seems to be universal is that the pandemic has opened employers' eyes, or maybe renewed their sensitivity to the multiple caregiving challenges that their employees are facing, especially their female employees. And there's a moral case to support employees as caregivers. There's a business case, as I just mentioned, to support employees as caregivers. Employers can make available a range of tools and resources and solutions to help all their employees better manage their financial lives, including their caregiving responsibilities. And there's a number of ways that this can manifest. Access to discounted childcare services or elder care services, help with even finding those services, finding slots available. Care concierge type services. We know that caregiving involves time-consuming logistical and administrative tasks, and there's care concierge services that some employers are making available. Digital platforms that give access to caregiving resources. In fact, we just launched a partnership with a company called Wealthy to offer care concierge as part of our workplace financial wellness offering, precisely because that's exactly what employers were telling us their employees needed help with. And just as employers have a role and the workplace has a role with helping women with these challenges, government can also play a role. And I'm going to hit again on what I think is so critical, particularly for women, and that is helping caregivers avoid the income disruption that often comes with caregiving through more universal paid family and medical leave policies, more uniform, more universal, available for everybody. The government already has kind of the frameworks for large-scale programs that promote financial security, like Social Security. The private sector, on the other hand, companies like all of ours, we have the technology, in some cases the benefits expertise, the ability to scale and administer programs in partnership with employers. We saw an example of this when the Secure Act was passed. The government turned to the private sector to help expand access to retirement plans for small business workers who were often left without that kind of coverage. So those are just a few of the things we can do to help women get on firmer financial footing and help them help their families get on firmer financial footing.
Judy, thank you very much. The coming together of all stakeholders, business, nonprofit, governments, to make an impact on women's lives, can't be overstated. So thank you very much for sharing that. Nate, let's move to the future. We talked about aging. Let's go towards what's happening in the future. Now, PIMCO is empowering young women to be tomorrow's leading investors. And I know you're doing that through Girls Who Invest. How are you building this talent pipeline of bright young women in the asset management industry? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, this is really exciting. We know diversity is a competitive advantage, and we've seen firsthand how it improves business outcomes. So we're adamant about recruiting more and bringing more females in to be asset managers and to be portfolio managers. That said, we do care about the field, and so we want to look forward and see many more women managing the world's wealth. And we do that through this partnership with Girls Who Invest. So they're an organization committed to investing in the talent pipeline for asset management. And just a couple data points. Right now in North America, less than 10% of mutual fund portfolio managers are women. Only 6% of CIOs of the largest U.S. money managers are women. Girls who invest have a goal of 30 by 30. So that's 30% of the world's investable capital managed by women by 2030. Now that's not far from now. We know there's a lot of ground to carry. And I just always have to say, whenever I speak to this, it troubles me that we know that women represent more than 30% of the population. But this number, 30%, is actually more in line with other professions like medicine and law. So it's a relatively short-term goal, but obviously we want to stretch further. So since 2018, more than 800 students from U.S. universities and colleges have participated in one of Girls Who Invest summer programs and online intensives, 20 of which we've hired at PIMCO. And we're looking forward to hosting our next class this year. And I'll just share a little bit about that summer intensive, which combines academic and real world experience. So during the first week of the program, their scholars learn core finance and investment concepts from world-class business professors. Develop core technical skills and soft skills to thrive in a business environment. During the last few weeks, they complete paid internships with leading investors at top investment firms across the US and the UK, including PIMCO. And we connect those scholars with experienced professionals who serve as individual mentors and offer those scholars a unique glimpse into the career at PIMCO, what it would look like. So what's exciting is that 80% of those scholars actually have stayed in the investment industry. So that is an indication that this works, and we're just really excited to continue growing this partnership because we think they are going to be key to the kind of shifts that we need that we want to see in our space.
Nate, thank you. That's exciting to see the work that you're doing and what the opportunity is for young women in financial services generally. We definitely need to be more diverse and more inclusive. And I know so many of our organizations represented in this on this panel and in the meeting today, all 170 people. I think that's quite exciting. Okay, so staying on the future, let's talk about digital technology. We've seen that digital technology has been propelled forward because of the pandemic in ways that we probably never would have imagined. So how do we make sure that this transition to digital is more inclusive? Nate, why don't we start with you?
Sure. All right. So I've got two thoughts and a story. All right. So the first thought is you need to have diverse representation at all levels. As a firm, we have significantly more women in our global technology team than the industry averages. And this really influences how we take steps to ensure that we're meeting the digital needs of our clients. The second is that you have to constantly check your biases. And I'm going to use an example again from the organization Know Me Network that I mentioned earlier. So pre-COVID, they had this plan to roll out a digital training program, like the app-based digital training program. And they were basically they were targeting women who had a minimum level of literacy, so semi-literate. And that was going to be a stretch, but they said, this would actually help us, scale our program. Then COVID hit, and that actually went well. And then COVID-19 came, and in the face of government shutdowns, they realized that they wouldn't be able to serve the majority of their women, so they ended up having to scale much more quickly than they expected, and that meant to women who were illiterate. And what surprised them is that was effective, that is successful. That women are now who are illiterate are on Zoom and actually going through the learning management program, their courses, even though they couldn't read. And so you think about the implications there. So it's an organization that's trying to scale, and we're limited to in-person gatherings. Now, in a post-COVID world, there are no limitations. Regardless of whether you have COVID, there are no limitations. So this is like a big eye-opening moment for them, just in terms of challenging their own assumptions and their biases. And for me and for our firm, as we reflect upon this, think, you know what, you really have to value inclusion and again, just really make sure that that these biases are mitigated, because you can unlock in a world of potential.
For sure, Nate, thank you. Fiona, let's hear from you.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. We're all starting to speculate, like, what's life post-COVID going to look like, and some are speculating that 20% of business travels are going to come back, maybe 40%, right? And so, as we think about jobs, never mind, all the important, care supports that Judy was talking about, but just the job itself. I think that actually changes the nature of jobs, right? It makes actually certain jobs that were way too greedy and impossible to combine with caregiving, maybe more manageable. On the other hand, you've got to ask yourself, who's in person, and who's in person, who's there at the client site, who's there in the meeting room versus who's dialing in from home. And I would say even during COVID, I have had meetings where my male colleagues have found some conference room in some Chase branch somewhere in the country to avail themselves of some peace and quiet because there's too much going on at home, right? And a piece of me is like, well, that's nice that you got to commandeer that conference room. What about your partner and, and what's going on in the home, right? So I worry that there's going to be a little bit of a hierarchy, a gender hierarchy in terms of who's still taking advantage of virtual and who's back in the office, right? And the other thing, though, that maybe is promising is, as Judy was saying, COVID has for sure brought our entire lives right into this Zoom box and made it clear just how much people are doing outside of work. And maybe that is forcing a reckoning with what it means, what a job should be and what it shouldn't, right? And I really do think there is a thing out there called a greedy job. And when we look at the gender gaps in income and pay, income in particular, unlike the racial gaps, gender gaps actually have dramatically closed over the years, right? We have made a lot of progress, but the place where we've made the slowest progress and the place where we have still the most outstanding share that is quote unquote unexplained is at the top, right? At the top of the income hierarchy, that's where we've made the least progress, and we still have sort of unexplained variation or gaps. And what economists are increasingly thinking is that there's maybe the notion of a greedy job is why that is because we have some jobs that are incompatible with being in a partnership and having dependents, and that you can only have one such greedy job in a family. And so for women who are working and who are, rising up in their organizations, they are very likely to have a working spouse, and it's impossible to have two greedy jobs in the home. And so, I sort of wonder whether workforces, employers who have paid a lot more attention to mental health over the last 12 months than they ever have, right? And thought about the mental health, the burnout, all these, wellness concerns, maybe those will carry forward, and maybe we'll kind of respect the fact that even though one can be on call because work was just in the other room, that we shouldn't have people be on call all the time, and sort of put some ring fences around what a job is. Anyway, I think maybe there will be some lasting impressions that COVID has made on kind of those norms.
Fiona, thank you. I think a lot of us would look forward to seeing some kind of research paper on the greedy job concept. So thank you. Judy, let's hear from you and see if we've got time to get some questions from the audience.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, the pandemic has certainly propelled many industries to accelerate to virtual channels. to serve their customers through this, but also to protect the health of their employees and their customers through this. And as you pointed out, financial services is certainly no exception. I know all of us in our companies saw probably almost our entire workforce go to virtual almost overnight, including in Prudential's case, I'm sure all of our cases, the thousands and thousands of people who still continue to take customer calls. We're figuring out how to do that from home amid call volumes that were through the roof. We've seen upticks in some services that we were offering, frankly, before the pandemic. We've seen them grow by leaps and bounds, which I think is a really positive outcome. We offer some one-on-one retirement counseling as part of our retirement plan administration. We offer that in a in-person context, in a virtual context, and the virtual ones have really taken off, which we hope persists, long after this the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. I think we all agree the acceleration to digital that we've seen is here to stay. And I think, it seems to be common sense, but that making sure that move as it persists is really inclusive really boils down to accommodation, our willingness to meet customers where they are in the channels that they choose. Some will prefer to go back to in-person when circumstances allow for that. Some will need to connect by phone because they prefer it. They like to talk to somebody, or maybe they don't even have a computer or an internet in their home. I mean, we know some houses are really struggling with this right now in this environment. We always have to, remember that the employees we serve in our workforce businesses, many of them are not sitting in front of a computer. They don't sit at desks, they're at job sites, they're on the road. So if digital is to be inclusive, I think it has to have a kind of mobile first sort of orientation to make sure that, you don't have to be sitting behind a computer or at a desk to access things in a digital environment. And of course, we have to make sure all of these channels can meet the needs of both employees and customers who have disabilities. We accelerated to digital because we had to. Many consumers will continue to do business this way because they find that they want to, that it's better, it's more efficient. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. But it does have to work for everyone.
Judy, thank you. Great discussion. We don't have much time. I think we might only have about 2 minutes left, but I do want to make sure we take at least one question from the audience. We've got lots of questions coming through, so hopefully people can connect with the panel later to get some of these questions answered. And we've got one from Marguerite. She's asking, do your studies reveal whether people can't save or won't save cash? Does it reveal the differences between to what extent women and men, blacks and whites, invest their money beyond home ownership? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I'm happy to take a first stab at it. I mean, one thing that we found was, we do see individual behavior differences. That being said, first of all, we see families of all income levels, gender saving. I mean, everybody is capable of saving. That, that's true all the way down to the lowest income families. And in some sense, an opportunity to do that. People experience income volatility, spikes and dips, right? And so spikes in one's income is an opportunity to save. So on the one hand, we do see that everybody is willing to save. On the other hand, we do see some individual differences in just how sensitive people's spending is to income shocks and job loss. But when we control for, people's savings levels, those behaviors go away. Those differences in behaviors go away. And my point with that is to say, some of the larger structures that are at play here are probably worth shining a light on, rather than sort of suggesting that some people are more capable of saving than others. I actually think that the ways in which our expense profile, our income profile enables certain families to save more just on a structural basis is what differentiates their cash buffer and then their resilience in the face of financial volatility, not so much their sort of individual behaviors. And that's just, I guess, a nod to say that like a lot of the gaps that we observe, be they racial gaps, gender gaps, is not the case that one person can just sort of save their way out of a 10 cents on the dollar racial wealth gap, right? Or earn their way out of a 70 cent on the dollar earnings gap, right? Like that, we just can't put the onus on the individual. There are larger structures at play.
Yeah. Fiona, thank you. And I think on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we will wrap it up. Thank you so much, Nate, Judy, Fiona, for such thoughtful dialogue. I know I got a lot out of this discussion, and I know everyone in the audience did. So thanks everyone for joining us, and to our three panelists. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. We didn't get to answer a lot of the questions that came through. So hopefully we'll find a way to either get back to the individuals who've asked these questions, or they can connect with any of us later on. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Pleasure.